evening, everyone. I'm joined here today by City Council Member Willie J. Lightfoot, Joshua Sharf from Brady United. Miss Kathy Richardson is over there on the back. It's so good to see her. Kathy is excited. She's been talking about the gun trace data report, her and Willie Lightfoot, forever. So they're very happy that we're here. Also, our Violence Prevention Services, Victor Saunders, and Greg Bello from the Rochester Police Department, who's the Public Information Officer. So I want to thank everyone for being here today. Today, we are releasing Rochester's Gun Trace Data Report, which was conducted by Brady, one of the nation's leading advocates working to end gun violence. I am excited about this release, but I am also frustrated because the complete report includes extensive information on the source of many of the illegal guns that end up on the streets of Rochester, and we were looking forward to make all of that information public today. But as many of you know that work in the space, I am a member of the Mayors for Illegal Guns, and we have worked for years to deal with something called the Tri-Hard Amendment, which is a 2003 amendment that says that the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms is unable to release certain information that names individuals if it's not turned over to or released by law enforcement. And that is a federal legislation that we are working very hard to get changed, not just in Rochester, but Brady and the national level. So as a result, there are a couple of pages that when released to the public, will be redacted. So we will continue to work to try to get that changed. This legislation was passed back in 2003, and it severely limits the ATF's ability to share data it collects with the public. I always tell people that's like the Center for Disease Control or the National Institutes for Health telling you they can't tell you what the causes of cancer are. So that is a challenge for us. Our administration, our push is always for, as you know, I say it all the time, trust and transparency, and that lack of transparency is frustrating for us. But again, nonetheless, it is a challenge for us. But let's talk about the positives of this report, the recommendations of this report, and what it allows us to be able to do. So I'll put that aside right now, my disappointment, and now let's talk about the good stuff. Even though we cannot share the complete report with everyone today, it is an incredibly value because it gives us added insight into the problem of illegal guns and will inform our strategies and policy decisions. As the report states, this study, quotes, paints the clearest public picture in a decade of the harm that crime guns are doing throughout the city. And, crucially, who is responsible for flooding the streets with weapons? For me, the study confirms with hard evidence what we have long known. The pipeline of guns flowing into our city does not begin in Rochester, but the people of Rochester are paying the price. Of the more than 6,000 crime guns recovered by the RPD between 2012 and 2022, more than half, 57%, came from outside New York State. But we also have a homegrown problem with crime guns. A disproportionate share of these firearms, more than 1,600 of them, come from just 30 dealers, including guns that have harmed police officers. And more than half of the guns from the top 30 dealers come from dealers within Monroe County. In other words, these guns don't come from the city of Rochester. Whether it's from suburban gun stores or out-of-state dealers, these guns are flowing into our city from somewhere else, but our citizens are paying the ultimate price. Yes, these guns started out as legal guns sold through legal transactions protected by the Second Amendment. But when just 30 gun dealers are responsible for more than 25% of the illegal guns on our streets, there's an obvious problem that needs to be addressed. Fortunately, some of the dealers on the list have already taken steps to limit gun sales and the types of guns they sell. This report makes clear more dealers need to follow that example. Their responsibility to the public does not end when the guns leave the stores. We're going to use the insight we gained from this study to develop even more initiatives to stem the flow of illegal guns into our city. And we're going to use it to demand policy changes at the state and federal level. Here are some of the recommendations that the report gives us. Number one, encourage other cities to commission similar reports so we can get a larger context of the problem. Two, encourage journalists to use these reports to inform the public about the supply side. The supply side has been an issue that we have not talked about, the supply side of the gun trafficking equation. And also encourage our partners in the federal, state, and county level to hold problem gun dealers accountable with stepped-up oversight and inspections. And four, encourage elected officials to adopt regulations that will enforce problem gun dealers to act more responsibly. There are simply too many illegal guns on our streets, and something needs to change, and this report is yet another tool that will help achieve that change. Now I would like to ask Rochester City Council member Willie Lightfoot to say a few words. I want to celebrate his leadership and the hard work of the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition for championing this project through several years to make this report happen. So I know Councilmember Lightfoot is thrilled to see that we finally reached this point. We know that this is not everything, but this is just a tool that will help us get to where we need to be in terms of attacking this problem of guns in our community. So Councilmember Lightfoot.
Good morning, and thank you, Mayor. I, too, am a little discouraged this morning, but also encouraged because we always want to look at situations from a glass half full. I would say again, good morning to everyone. Today is a historic day on many fronts. First, I want to thank the former Mayor, Lovely Warren, Mayor Evans, his administration, Police Chief David Smith, Brady Representatives Josh Scharf and Stephen Lindley. We are grateful for the work that Brady has done to help to bring this gun trace report to the public and for them doing it at no cost to our city taxpayers. I'm so grateful for the hard work of the Rock Against Gun Violence partners and our advocacy committee led by Kathy Richardson, who has been relentless supporting and getting this report. When we think of homicides and gun violence within our community, it plays out, ladies and gentlemen, like a horror movie that we've seen way too many times. But this is not a movie. These are real victims, real people, and gun violence impacts our entire community. Often in that current narrative of gun violence, we spend a lot of time talking about the shooter and the victims, while others never make the front page or news or social media that also play a major role and we believe have a major responsibility and should be held accountable. Some will say, well, what does this report do? We don't have a gun problem, we have a people problem. Well, I will agree. We have actually totally agree with that statement. We have people who are intentionally trafficking guns in our inner city communities disproportionately. We have people who are using laws to protect gun manufacturers, shady gun dealers, and we have people who don't want a complete gun trace data information report public to our community. So that is a people problem that we need to solve. The Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition promised this community we would work to answer the decade-old questions of where are the guns coming from. This redacted report helps to answer some of those questions. The data shows us that most of the crime guns, many are coming from local gun dealers in our suburbs. So where do we go from here? The Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition is committed to working with Mayor Evans, City Council, all of our partners in government, surrounding towns and villages to implement many of the recommendations in the report and some that will come up with collective community conversations over the next several months. We'll work with the Brady National to continue fighting to allow all gun trace data, and I want to reemphasize, all gun trace data information to be completely public with no redactions. The victims and families deserve complete transparency and accountability. We are committed to making sure all players are held accountable, and we will continue this critical conversation on the supply side of prevention and accountability. We encourage our citizens to get involved by joining our monthly meetings Every second Monday of the month, we have hybrid meetings here at City Hall, in person and virtual, at 6 p.m. every second Monday of each month. As a matter of fact, this coming Monday is our next Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition meeting. It's at 6 p.m. here at City Hall and City Council chambers. You can connect with us in person or virtually, and we also stream on the City Council YouTube page. We're also hosting next Tuesday a statewide Clergy for Safe Cities Gun Violence Summit next Tuesday at 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. at my church, Prayer House Church of God by Faith, located at 270 Cumberland Street. We have folks coming from all over the state, as well as Mayor Evans will be speaking. The Attorney General, Tish James, will be speaking to continue this conversation of educating, advocating, and eradicating gun violence in our prospective communities. I want to thank everyone again for this just another tool that we will build upon. The Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition will use this report to help us draft an action plan that we will be submitting to the mayor and city council in the very near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Lightfoot. And now I'd like to, again, reiterate our great thanks to Josh Schraff, General Counsel and Director of Programs at Brady. And I want to be clear. Brady is an organization that is bipartisan. If you remember, Jim Brady, who was Ronald Reagan, a Republican's press secretary, was the guy that was shot outside the Hilton Hotel. So this is not a political issue for Brady. And they make that clear not only in their mission statement and what they talk about regularly, but this is a bipartisan issue, and this is a bipartisan organization. This is not a political issue in what we're talking about here, and Brady has demonstrated that they are committed to helping to eradicate gun violence in our communities that we have seen rage out of control in New York State. And I want to thank Brady for their leadership, and I want to thank Josh for coming up from Washington to be with us today. Josh.
Thank you, and thank you, Mayor Evans. Thank you, Councilman Lightfoot, not just for your remarks, but also for your leadership around this project and your leadership around preventing gun violence here in Rochester. Thank you to the Rochester Police Department for providing the necessary data in order to create this report and for help with the analysis. And thank you to the community members that saw the value of this report long before it was created and advocated hard to make it a reality. American gun violence is a public health epidemic. Every day in this country, an average of 117 people are shot and killed, and an additional 210 people are shot and survive. Gun violence is now the #1 killer of children and teens in the United States. And the ripple effect of gun violence extends far beyond these numbers, to families, to neighborhoods, to communities. Gun crime is a substantial part of the gun violence epidemic, and it impacts our communities disproportionately. In a recent year, about half of America's firearms homicides occurred in just 127 cities. And black men, aged 15 to 34, are 24 times more likely to die by firearm homicide than white men in that same age bracket. Preventing gun violence is a matter of public health, and it is also a matter of racial justice. For the sake of our children, our families, our communities, we must do everything that we can at the local, at the state, and at the federal level to end this gun violence epidemic. At Brady, we know that a problem with so many different root causes must be addressed from all different angles, and that's why we take a holistic approach to preventing gun violence, focusing on education, on programs, on litigation, on legislation. And just like any other epidemic, it is imperative to study and address gun violence at its source. We must first understand the sources and the channels of trafficked firearms and crime guns in order to craft evidence-based supply-side solutions, and trace reports are a foundational step in that process. Make no mistake, gun industry behavior matters. And looking at data, such as the numbers, the types, the time to crime of recovered crime guns, is instructive. Gun manufacturers have a responsibility to monitor their distribution chain and to ensure that their products are not being diverted to the illegal market. Gun dealers have a responsibility to adopt the safest business practices and to identify and decline gun sales where there are indicators of trafficking and straw purchasing. Now, most gun dealers take that responsibility very seriously, but those that do not, those that prioritize profit over public safety, cause immense harm. Indeed, national trace data last released by ATF showed that only 5% of gun dealers were responsible for transferring 90% of crime guns that were recovered across the country. We're also disappointed. We're also disappointed that ATF chose to redact the public version of this report. We disagree with ATF's interpretation that the Tiahrt Amendment requires it. But this is an acute reminder that the Tiahrt Amendment is bad policy that hides important and life-saving data from the American public. Even so, it is our hope, it is our intention that the report released today serves as a basis for Rochester to better understand the origins of its crime guns and craft impactful solutions. The report itself takes a look back at crime guns recovered in the city over the last 10 years or so, with specific emphasis on the last 3 years, and provides some important takeaways. About 55% of guns recovered and traced in Rochester were sold by 10% of dealers in the data set. That's not as stark as the national numbers of 2 decades ago, but it's still a small percentage of dealers transferred the majority of Rochester's crime guns. Now, nearly all of the top 20 dealers that transferred crime guns recovered in Rochester over the last decade come from New York State and most from Monroe County. But when you factor in time to crime and looking at the last 3 years, you see that there are more out-of-state dealers than in the top 20. And on the topic of time to crime, which is an important factor in determining whether there were indicators of trafficking at the point of sale, about 40% of the crime guns with a short time to crime of 3 years or less were transferred by only about 20 or so dealers. Over half of the firearms were traced to out-of-state dealers, and these include dealers who have a known history of transferring guns that are trafficked on the Iron Pipeline. And ghost gun recoveries, ghost guns being unserialized and often untraceable firearms, are on the rise in Rochester, particularly since 2020. This is in line with national trends that we are seeing that occur most acutely in states that have strong gun laws. We at Brady are pleased to deliver this report to Rochester, and we're privileged to have partnered with the city on the project. And I encourage everyone to dig into the report, to read it, to better understand the sources and paths of Rochester's crime guns, and to be part of crafting solutions to the gun violence epidemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you everyone that are here. I just want to reiterate a few points of the report that stood out to me that I think are extremely important to reiterate. And Josh said some of these things. A small percentage of firearm dealers sell a disproportionate number of Rochester's crime guns. The majority of guns recovered by the RPD come from just 10% of dealers, and 28% of crime guns recovered by the RPD were traced to just 1% of dealers. Most of the dealers that sold the highest number of crime guns are located in Monroe County. Of the crime guns sold, the top 30 crime gun dealers, 53% came from dealers located in Monroe County, 13% are or were located elsewhere within New York State, and 34% are or were located out of state. Crime guns circulate long after the dealers go out of business, and ghost guns are on the rise. So between those data points and the recommendations that we made, those are some key elements of this report. And obviously, for those of you that love numbers and love information, I encourage you to dig into that report. But again, I want to thank Brady. I want to thank the Rochester Police Department. I want to thank the ROC Against Gun Violence Coalition, who has been dogged on this through 2 administrations. They signed a agreement with the previous administration in Brady, and then I signed another agreement. So that tells you how important this is for us as a community and for us in city government. So with that, I will take any of your questions, and I'm glad we have Josh here, and he will answer any as well. And again, we have Greg Bello here as well from the Rochester Police Department. So I have a tight time frame, so we'll be able to take a few questions. Berkeley?
Does the report say that these gun dealers are selling these guns knowing that they're going to be used illegally, or are the people who are buying them from these select group of gun dealers, then just not taking care of them, having them stolen and reselling them?
Well, I think there's two pieces to that question, and I'll let Josh weigh in on this specifically to the report, but I'll just say this in the broader context. There are, just like how there are bad actors, I think, that are gun dealers, and some of those bad actors that are gun dealers are I believe that they are doing so without having the necessary safeguards in place, and as a result, you have individuals that should not have access to firearms that are using them. Now, you also have individuals that get firearms, steal firearms, and that's an issue. I don't think that we can also sugarcoat that. But Josh, I don't know if you want to weigh in on anything else that I might have missed there.
I'd certainly say that there are certain dealers that we know that their guns are turning up in Rochester that are certainly on notice that their guns are being disproportionately recovered at crime scenes across the country. That's something that's absolutely the case. There are often, very frequently, signs of potential trafficking at point of sale. Straw purchasing, there are known signs that can be screened for and must be screened for. Multiple sales of firearms is a potential indicator of trafficking. Looking at the types of firearms that are being purchased, there are a variety of factors that gun dealers know about, that they need to adopt the strongest business practices in order to screen out those sales. And they have every obligation and they have every right to decline a sale if they do not think that it is a safe sale. So there are plenty of dealers that know that. Leave it there.
Thank you. And if you can speak up a little bit, Brian. You mean in Rochester? From the trace data. I don't know if that's in the trace data report.
We don't have the reported stolen gun data in that report. And I would say with that type of data, we are always interested in to know when those guns are reported stolen. Are they reported stolen before they are recovered from a crime scene or after they're recovered from a crime scene? And there's also a lot of nuance in that data as well.
Josh, gun store transparency.
Willie, you wanted to add one thing? Go ahead. Go ahead.
In some of these questions that you're asking, which are great questions, I think with the information and answers that we may not have, what we do have is those are opportunities. So we need to look at those as opportunities for policy, right, that we can put in place. Because that's one of the things I looked at when I talked about there are players who never really make the news and things of that nature. That stolen information is information that we need to look at too. What can we do around that? How can we gather that data? How can we make that data public, right? So we can begin to connect all of those dots. So I think in that space, as far as stolen in that data, there's opportunity, I think, for us as far as the recommendation and action plan and the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition, along with the mayor and administration, we're going to be looking at. This helps us to look at those gaps. The report helps us to look at these gaps now and gives us a foundation to be able to look at what things can we improve on.
Thank you. Any other last questions? Berkeley, go ahead.
So the public doesn't have access to lots of the information in the report, but you have access to it, correct?
Correct.
Can you use the information that you have?
Absolutely. I think that this will give us the opportunity to be able to do a lot of things as it relates to addressing this problem. And I have not hesitated to use every option available, even with some of the criticism you may get. I believe in using every legal tool available. That is the right that we are guaranteed as Americans, to be able to use our legal system, to be able to use the policy system that is the U.S. Congress in New York State. So based upon this report, I will continue to use every single tool that I can to try to eradicate the scourge that we have in our community. And I'll just say this. The past 2 weeks, I've been with mayors from around the world, every continent. The U.S., when we talk about the challenges in our country, and if I'm with mayors from Europe, Africa, Asia, I'm one of the only few mayors where I raise my hand and I say that the biggest issue that we have in our communities, not just in Rochester and across the community, is gun violence. So this is a very uniquely American problem. Very uniquely American problem. There are countries where they have not had a homicide due to gun violence in decades. But in America, we do. So we have a serious issue here with violence, and we have to use every single tool available to be able to eradicate that. And I'm grateful that this report will allow us to be able to dig deeper, pull the onion back, and be able to deal with certain sections of the report that will allow us to be able to address many of the things that you asked in your questions today. Brian, you had another one? Well, I think one of the ones that we will continue to do is, we work very closely with advocacy groups like the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition, but also I'm a part of hundreds of mayors that are a part of Mayors Against Illegal Guns, which is a very active organization. We continue to work very closely with Brady. So the Try Hard Amendment is something that we think is getting a lot of momentum in terms of changing, in terms of informing the public. The Gun Dealers Code of Conduct, that's something that the Rock Against Gun Violence has talked about regularly, and I know the state is also interested in that. So there are a lot of things that we can do to continue to try to take this report and put forth recommendations that will be able to have an impact. But I'll also say this, there's a reason why Victor Saunders is also standing here, because I'll always say it's about prevention, intervention, and suppression. And part of our work also is making sure that we get to our folks to make sure that they don't want to pick up a gun in the first place. So that's that's the preventative part. So how can I get people, over the last couple of days, we had people shooting folks over dumb stuff. And I say that regularly. And when I say dumb stuff, I mean absolutely ridiculous things. Things that if normal, regular, everyday people decided to pick up a gun for, the homicide rate would be even higher. So how do we also intervene in those situations to try to get folks not to pick up a gun in the first place? So that's the preventative piece. So we are going at this at all angles: prevention, intervention, and suppression. The Rochester Police Department, what number were we at as of yesterday in terms of illegal guns we've taken off the street? So, and now there's 365 days in a year. Already we're over 350 illegal guns that we've taken off the streets. We are using actionable intelligence. And this is where we continue to work with the ATF and all of our federal partners to be able to help us with this. So already over 350 guns taking off the streets, and that's been done through surgical precision because of the work of the Rochester Police Department. So that is also things that we will continue to do to make sure that we end this illegal gun problem. Prevention, intervention, suppression, but knowledge is power. And the acquisition of knowledge is extremely important. So this report gives you the acquisition of knowledge. But now how do we take this into the application of knowledge? And the application of knowledge is what will allow us to be able to transform our community to deal with the supply side of the gun areas. Because there's not a gun dealership on Jefferson Avenue, but they disproportionately deal with the amount of violence from guns on Jefferson Avenue. There's not a gun dealership on J Street, but they deal disproportionately with the guns that happen on J Street. So how do we take this report from the acquisition of knowledge, from all of us reading it, synthesizing it, to then allow us to be able to have application, to have long-standing, sustainable change that will allow us to decrease this problem that we have in our city and in our country. So I want to thank you all for being here today. I want to thank again Josh and Brady for all their hard work, the Rochester Police Department, and the dogged work of the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition. So thank you everybody for being here, and I want to encourage everyone to please read the report, and we have made that available. And I want to thank the media again for allowing us to gather today. Thank you.